IncluCITY webinar series. Wherever you're joining from, we hope you're having a good afternoon, a good evening, or a good morning. Today's session will be on creating inclusive infrastructure. My name is Anna May Muldowney, and I am part of the Inclusive Design team at the Global Disability Innovation Hub, and I am your host for today. Next slide, please. So today's agenda. So first, as I am welcoming you here, we'll also begin to set the scene. Followed by that, we'll have a video that will spotlight some of our experiences from when we visited the Global Disability Summit in April. Followed by this, we'll have an introduction to today's topic, and then we'll introduce you to our fantastic panelists. Followed by that, we'll have a discussion with the panelists, a Q&A, some rapid fire round questions to end up the session, and a closing session. Just some housekeeping, so captioning is live and available, and you can find it if it's not switched on already at the bottom of your screen. And please place your questions in the Q&A because we'd love to come back to those in our later session. Just so everybody knows, this session will be recorded and will be made available on YouTube. Next slide. So today's webinar, it's the second in a series of 4. So if you enjoy this one, please join us for the next sessions. This session focuses on how to make the physical environment of everyday spaces and services truly inclusive. It explores both visible and invisible disabilities and addresses the full infrastructure lifestyle, policy, design, planning, implementation, and monitoring. This session will situate both our global comparison report and our global action report into the debate of physical inclusive infrastructure. Next slide. So, why must we act now more than ever? Well, this session, as I've already said, is about creating inclusive infrastructure, but it's more than just bricks and mortar. It's about power, equity, and participation. We know cities are growing fast, and by 2050, nearly 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas. But our infrastructure isn't keeping pace with this growth, especially when it comes to inclusion. Over 1.3 billion people worldwide live with disabilities, and yet many are effectively excluded from urban life due to how infrastructure is designed, built, and maintained. On top of this, 80% of people with disabilities live in low and middle income countries, where infrastructure systems are already stretched, underfunded, or informal. If we don't act now, we risk building cities that are embedded in inequality, where billions are excluded from access to transport, housing, education, and healthcare. In our next slide, you will hear from some of the people that are at the heart of this issue, who we met at the Global Disability Summit. And now on the next slide, the video will play.
The Global Disability Innovation Hub recently attended the Global Disability Summit in Berlin, where we asked people about how their city shapes their daily life. Here is a snippet of what they had to say.
So I'm a change maker. I'm a change maker in all the work that I do. So as someone with lived experiences, growing up, I was often segregated, excluded, bullied for so many years. And I don't know, seeing those impacts in my communities have really affected me. Growing Inclusive Future is that where we all voices are included in the spaces that we talk about. In decision making in government, I mean that young people are at the center at those tables. When we talk about policies, when we talk about different types of reports and things like that, youth need to be at those tables, because honestly, who are these policies for? Is it for our policymakers or is it for the people? Because it's not for the policymakers, it's for the people. And that what really means to me an inclusive future is having those youth voices at those tables, having those voices from different diverse perspectives there. It really shapes policy. And I think that that's the future that I'm committed to serving. And that's the future that I'm committed to serving worldwide, but wherever it takes me, is to really connect and really work with each other, state agencies, federal agencies, nationally, nonprofits, all of them together to really making sure that we involve and we include those youth voices in our decision making, because honestly, this is our future. And always importantly, I always say this, is nothing about us without us.
Hi, my name is Muthu. I'm from the Maldives and I live in the Malé city, the capital of Maldives. And I don't think my city is accessible at all. It's crowded. It's, in one word, it's chaos. There's too many cars, too many motorbikes. The pavement is tiny. When it rains, it floods. People who are visually impaired, they cannot be independent outside on the road. Yeah, it's pretty fully packed. There's no space for pedestrians. I think we are very car centric. Like, we focus on vehicles a lot. So when we design our roads, we reduce the space given to the pedestrians. There's enough space for parking. There's enough space for cars to drive around. But I wouldn't recommend you guys walking around the city on your own.
You just said that my city, Faisalabad, is not inclusive, not accessible, and there are a lot of traffic problems. And the government should take interest in order to improve the city. Although there are good cities also there, like Lahore, Karachi, and Islamabad, there are some accessibility, but not all, not fully. The buildings are not accessible, and the roads are not accessible. And this is for what we are advocating and trying to help people.
So as the end of this video says, let's work together to make our cities more inclusive. So let's continue the discussion in this webinar on how we can start to make action on some of those difficult points. So next slide, please. So before we dive into the research and into the panel discussion, a quick word about who we are. So the Global Disability Innovation Hub, or GDI Hub, as I will refer to it numerous times, no doubt, in this webinar, is a research and practice centre based at University College London, which accelerates ideas into impact for a more just world for disabled people and for all people. The work I'm sharing today is part of our AT2030 Programme, sub-programme Inclusive Infrastructure, which is funded by UK International Development and explores the recognition that access to assistive technology requires an inclusive and accessible built environment. Next slide. Through this Inclusive Infrastructure sub-programme, the Global Disability Innovation Hub led a 4-year research programme in 6 diverse cities: Nairobi, Freetown, Medellín, Surakarta, Ulaanbaatar, and Varanasi. Together with local partners, we engaged 104 persons with disabilities and 94 urban stakeholders to understand the current state of infrastructure and, critically, how it's experienced on the ground. We use methods like photo diaries, journey mapping, interviews, and co-design workshops, as we believe that inclusive design starts by listening, not just to what people say, but how they move through, interact, and feel about the spaces around them. Next slide. Through this global and local research effort, several key priority areas emerged. Today, I will set the scene of today's session by outlining 5 areas where we saw cities struggle, but also where we saw potential to act when it comes to today's topic. So these priority areas are embedding inclusion from the start, localizing and implementing inclusive design standards, strengthening inclusive city governance, designing for first and last mile access, and investing in training and awareness. Next slide. So participants in the research called to be included in decision-making from the start of design and planning processes. This was really key to them. And here is a quote from our study, which highlights that this participant is really pushing for this and saying, in Ulaanbaatar, people were consulted on some parts of accessibility, but excluded from wider decisions like the replanning of the Gur districts, where many people with disabilities live. And that's a missed opportunity. And I couldn't agree more with the participant that is a really missed opportunity. And that's why this is the key first step as an early first step, to have early engagement. And it doesn't just improve outcomes, but it saves resources. So retrofitting is expensive, and we all know this on this call, and often it's incomplete and it's not a solution. So we need to really make sure that inclusion happens from the start and is part of our project briefs, our funding strategies, and our procurement criteria from day one. So next slide. So the next priority was highlighted by participants was localizing and implementing standards. So international accessibility standards can offer a very solid base, but they rarely lead to change on their own. In many places, they're either too general or too disconnected from the real context. So here's another quote from our study, and that highlights this. And the participant says, in formal areas, we can apply the public space manual, but in informal areas with steep slopes, narrow paths, it's almost impossible to implement as written. And this shows in this quote that without local adaptation, even the best guidance can be irrelevant. So the picture on the right here shows a wheelchair user in one of the comuna areas in Medellín where this quote has come from. And you can see as the picture is depicting that the wheelchair user is on a very narrow street, which is quite steep topography and has no footpaths. And it would be very difficult to implement footpaths and to implement slopes in such a way that standards might say it should be applied. So there really needs to be a localized approach for these type of contexts. Next slide. So strengthening inclusive city governance was also a very important priority on their list. So while all 6 cities we researched had policies and laws on inclusion, and we're really trying to begin to make change, or we're making strides to make change, there's always an opportunity to strengthen their governance, as gaps remain despite all of these policies in the 6 cities and beyond those 6 cities. Participants called for inclusion to not be a standalone project, but instead to be embedded in how a city governs itself across departments, budgets, and leadership transitions, similar to how we heard the lady speak about it at the Global Disability Summit in Berlin. So these quotes here, I've added 2 as it was such a strong element of the research, where one from Nairobi, which said, many organizations assume that they are experts and don't collaborate, leaving out voices that could bring better solutions. And secondly, from Medellín, Colombia, the biggest challenge is continuity. When leadership changes, priorities shift and accessibility gets lost. And I think that's really important about why this needs to be a continuous, non-standalone project that crosses different projects and isn't siloed as one specific thing. So next slide. So this is something that we have often seen as one of the weakest links in accessibility. So the need for designing first and last mile accessibility. So a beautiful accessible bus station means little if a footpath is broken, unlit, or non-existent. In Surakarta, Indonesia, one participant described a situation where the bus shelter didn't align with the bus door. So although the system was technically accessible, in reality, it wasn't usable. Cities often focus on flagship projects, the participant says. But if we want people to reach hospitals, jobs, or markets, we must fix the small gaps in the journey. That means curb cuts, continuous paths, safe crossings, proper signage, especially in informal areas where infrastructure is fragmented. And it really shows that we must really think about how our services can also be seamless. And that's something we'll speak in our next webinar. So if you're particularly interested in services and in first to last mile connectivity, we really ask that you join that session too and be part of that discussion. And the image here shows a bus stop in Surakarta in Indonesia, which has steps up to the bus. So next slide. And our final priority area for today was training and awareness. So this one, it was also very, very prominent in our research. And it shows that while even the best policies, so even if everything that I've previously spoke about was perfect and the designs were perfect, they can fail if people delivering them lack the knowledge and the motivation to do it efficiently and effectively. In Varanasi in India, a participant noted, architects don't experience what disabled people do. So they need a dialogue to enrich their understanding. Design education, and I've seen this myself as an architect, often lacks lived experience. And public service staff often don't receive disability training at all. So we need to make this a systematic investment in training across city departments, construction firms, and planning bodies, evaluating disability inclusion as a core part of what it means to deliver quality infrastructure. We can't only think about the built environment, but we need to think about everybody's involved in that built environment, from the start of a design or the start of planning to the people who are monitoring that and looking after it in the future. So next slide. So what this whole webinar session is about, and this whole series is about, is our Global Action Report. So all of the findings that are captured today are in our Global Action Report on delivering inclusive design in cities. And this report is a culmination of our research and sets out 10 principles and 16 action areas that the cities can use as a roadmap. It includes practical recommendations on everything from inclusive procurement and budgeting to climate adaptation and digital inclusion. And most importantly, it's designed to be adaptable and grounded in evidence, but flexible enough to work across different city contexts. So I'd really advise, if you're interested in this, or you're interested in any of the topics, or want to make change within your city, that you join. You go to this QR code that's on the screen, and you have a look at this report, and you see how this might be able to be implemented into your work. And we'll share this link again. We'll hopefully share the link in the chat if somebody from my team can do that, and we'll also share this QR code at the end of the webinar. So next slide. So that's definitely enough talking from me as such, and because we have such a fantastic panel today, and I'm more than happy to introduce you to all of these panelists. So our first panelist is Maisa Obaid, and she is the Accessibility Manager at Expo City Dubai, and is a strategic leader in accessibility policies and systems with over 20 years of experience in accessibility and inclusion across government, corporate, and international sectors. Her expertise spans accessibility policy development and strategic implementation, ensuring that digital and built environments exceed compliance standards and foster true inclusivity. She has successfully led major global accessibility initiatives, including COP28, providing global policy guidance, digital accessibility strategies, and universal design implementation. Our next panelist is Paris Wilson, and she is an inclusive design strategic change management specialist and associate director in the social impact team at McDonald's. Paris works with clients to deliver socially inclusive, accessible, and equitable design outcomes in the built environment through business change strategy, design practice advisory, and user engagement. Paris project led the it's so impressive that I'm getting caught up in all her information. These panelists have really made very, very impressive careers so far. So Paris project led the industry development of the inclusive design overlay to the REBA plan of work, and is a member of LLDC's Olympic Park and London City Airport's accessibility panel. She uses her lived experience to advise on creating accessible environments with a particular focus on neurodiversity. Then we have George Arab Nadaye, and he is the president of the Architectural Association of Kenya. He practices architecture as a partner in Sidescape Studio Limited in Nairobi and Mombasa. He has previously served as a part-time lecturer at the University of Nairobi, Kenyatta University, and the Nairobi Institute of Technology, where he taught foundational architectural design and ICT for architecture. And then finally, we have Gosa Zelike, and he is an Ethiopian citizen with a disability. He works as a disability advocate and inclusion consultant, primarily conducting accessibility audits, and has a breadth of experience working with organizations of persons with disabilities in Addis Ababa. So what a fantastic panel. And I'll definitely hand you over to them now as we begin to ask them some questions. Next slide. So for our first panels, George, I'd like to ask you, so as a president of the Architectural Association of Kenya, and with your background in education, we've spoken about the need for education and training. So education plays a vital role in advancing inclusive design, and it can often be seen as the starting point. At the Association of Architects Kenya, how are you promoting inclusive design among both practicing architects and architecture students? And in a city like Nairobi, which ranges from formal areas like the central business district to vast informal settlements, how do you address those very different urban contexts in your approach?
Thank you very much, Aname, and I apologize for not having a very good visual, but I hope my sound is clear. I couldn't join with another gadget which I have, but just to go straight to your question, and I hope you can hear me. Please confirm. I didn't have an opportunity to do a sound check. Okay, perfect. Thank you. In a city like Nairobi, where the gap between the have and the have-nots is quite big, the issues of basically universal access and inclusivity is very pronounced, particularly because on one side, you don't actually have those infrastructure to begin with. And then on the other hand, you also have a situation where prioritization by allocation of budgets and resourcing is skewed towards a particular need of the political class. But at the same time, the decision makers do not have inherently this knowledge that inclusive design is actually something that everyone can get to use. So when you mention issues, for example, elevating from one level to another using a ramp, the default detail is a staircase. But if you are to explain to someone who is a developer that a ramp would actually be used by able people and the PWDs likewise, it becomes a challenge to explain that. So indeed, we start off with the issues of stewardship through education, and it starts off with the schools, where we, as the Architectural Association of Kenya, we do a lot of advocacy in what we call, our tagline is really excellence, the built environment. And we have been pushing for the idea of inclusion through universal design, to the point that the idea is that a design is not good, a design is only good depending on how many users get to enjoy it. We also try to push the same agenda even the profession through our continuous professional development, and indeed some of the programs we've done with KDI, for example, as one of our partners in developing the integrated and inclusive infrastructure framework for Kenya, which is targeting the informal settlements. Really the people who have shown the biggest, they are the most disadvantaged when it comes to access of very basic infrastructure. But then you have another level of people who are disadvantaged in these settlements who are living with various forms of disability. Then you can get to a point whereby even the able person there doesn't have the basic infrastructure. So obviously what happens is that even when a road is done, it's assumed that a pavement is good enough. Then we start asking questions about the inclination. Can someone with a wheelchair be able to use that road? So we are pushing that from the perspective of the professionals, and we are making it a moral issue, because some of these decisions are being made by designers on their tables. And when they make these decisions, it translates into allocation of funds. But we are also saying lastly that it's very important for us to intentionally design and intentionally allocate the resources that will be able to cover the needs of people living with disability, and including every other person that is advantaged in the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, George. And I think it was really a really interesting insight into Nairobi and to the situation and to the different kind of contexts that exist into that. And I think it really brings to the heart of that whole part of the research and into the Global Action Report around localization and the need for localization. And I think that that's really, really clear in Nairobi, that there's a real need for that. And I think it was really strong to summarize some of your work around to really push architects to say that their design is not good unless, as much people as possible can use it and enjoy that space. Because I think people often don't consider that it's not just accessibility, but it's, social interaction and people being able to live the life that they want to live. And I think that whole moral aspect is a very good thing, and to ask professionals questions and make them think, because many professionals, I feel, just don't often think about the questions. And I think that that's a really strong part of what you just said there. And naturally, the allocation of funding would also be a massive support. So thank you for that, George, and we'll come back to you later in the session. So then on to our next speaker, if we can pull up the slide. So our next speaker is Gosa. So Gosa, as a person living with a physical disability in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, can you share a bit about your lived experience of navigating your city? And also, based on your professional work and conducting access audits and engaging with organizations of persons with disabilities, what do you believe are the most effective ways to drive real improvements in infrastructure?
Yeah, I think you can hear me, Aname.
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you so much for your question and even the explanations that you already provided. And I would like to say good day for everyone. Good night. I mean, good evening. Sorry. So, what I would like to share is, as you may know, or you may have the information that, especially in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, these days several kind of constructions are being undertaking the place. And also even the I mean, you might have the information that the corridor development plan is taking place vastly in Addis Ababa, which is bringing a kind of basic kind of infrastructural changes in Addis, which is good for people with disabilities, especially like me. But on the way, the development and the construction is taking place. At some point, even I could share my experience that I am almost taking half day to have one business to accomplish with my one business or appointment it could be. So which is the constructions are here and there are taking place, and there are no optional kind of ways to travel or to cross by, because at some point for people with disability it could be a kind of at least accessible, but for person with disabilities it's you know, so difficult to cross by with those optional ways. So we see development, which is good for people with disability, which might bring kind of relaxing pathways, relaxing kind of buildings, but at the same time there are challenges, like the challenges could start from even the walkways already built one and the finished one has, you know, a kind of obstacles, like there are pedestrian ways, and within the pedestrian way in the middle you could find different electric poles, different kind of flower towers, which is designed for a kind of beauty for the city, but at the same time barrier for people with disability, with different form of impairment. And you could see also slippery kind of materials being used for on the grounds of the pathways. Also, you may see the lack of kind of direction indicators. You cannot access, you cannot have a kind of direction indicators where you want to go. Maybe if you go in the wrong direction, you might be, you know, spend more time, and then also you might be required to return back and use another kind of way. So and even you may find different kind of holes even in the middle of the pathways at some point. Maybe those kind of defects could be missed due to under construction, but at the same time you may find it open for public use. And also you see different kind of buildings are required by the government to make their buildings transparent with the glass. So those glasses are, at some point for people with partial impairment, it brings kind of hazardous. So those kind of stuffs are already there. And also, as I said earlier, you may find pathways connecting buildings to building, and also as the renovations are taking recently, and there are huge buildings, so instead of demolishing those big and huge buildings, the pathways are already crossed through under the building. So in that case, you may find stairs. You may not find also ramps. In a place you find the ramps. Also, the ramps might be used with, constructed with slippery materials, or the slope itself is not standard. And even the stairs, to use the stairs has their own, uh, back, backward. So different defects over there. But at the same time, I could say we are getting, spaces to travel and even to spend more time having green areas and recreational places. But at the same time, within these recreational centers and kind of green areas being constructed sideways to the roads, they are not constructed with the eyes of people with disabilities accessibility. Instead, the constructions are being taking place in the form of, like, adventure. At some point also, you may see romantic kind of places, but those places are not convenient for wheelchair users, for crunch users, and also for visual.
So I think we may have lost your audio a little bit there.
People. So, sorry for the inconvenience.
We can hear you now. It's back.
How about now?
Yeah, it's here. It's
Good.
back.
So I was mentioning the transportation stations, where the transportation starts to departure, or and even the drop-off stations are not studied based on the needs of people with disability or the convenience of a person with disability. So you may be dropped with where you could not find a kind of pathways to the pedestrian walkways, or at some point it might be far in distance. Yeah, those kind of stuffs are. It seems simple when I mention it, but when you go to have a business, to have kind of meeting somewhere, you may take even at some time. I I I I I just calculated even half day I have spent over the travel, even before reaching to the business where I want to go. So those kind of things are there. As I could say, the government should, work collaboratively with OPDs, organizations of person with disability, and the professionals in the area who works on accessibility standards and standards of based on the standards, also having audits and that kind of stuff. It would be, at some point reasonable, when even if there is a kind of challenges even we face. So in Ethiopia, the good thing, we do have, several kind of laws. Those laws are not, specific with number standards. The good thing here and there, the people with disabilities concerns are, in general terms have been mentioned, and UNCRPD protocols and also have been signed in Ethiopia in 2010, which is good. But we need some standards, specifically like standards of accessibilities. So, which is specifically mentioned in number. Otherwise, here and there, even the toilets are being constructed sideways to the roadway. So you see some toilets are, you know, narrow, too narrow, and some toilets are, you know, somehow it seems reasonable. So I didn't, you know, measured them. But you see the logos of people with disability can use it, but at the same time the ramps has no, you know, protection aside, and at some point also you may find very steepy kind of ramps being constructed, and the doors at some point also being, you know, too narrow. Even to reach to the toilet points, you may find different kind of, you know, barriers even to cross the green areas. The green areas, as I mentioned, here and there, stepping stones being placed, not, you know, leveled kind of pathways. So yeah, such challenges are there. At the same time, also the good thing is we do have laws which is not bit, you know, specific. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Gosan, for giving us that insight into a different context in Africa, in Ethiopia. And I think there's some very interesting points you brought up there. It's things that I suppose we've spoken about in our research, and we've seen in our research around connectivity and about wayfinding. And I think the point that you bring up about the additional time that it brings to your day and your professional duties, and how it like impacts your daily life in a way that may not affect people who don't have the same disability as you, and it's quite unjust in many ways. And I think it's interesting to look at that injustice in comparison to the fact that you talk about your city and their new construction. And when we look at the fact that our cities are all growing, as I spoke about in earlier slides, that it is really important that we ensure that these new constructions are inclusive and do consider people with disabilities in all aspects. And you can see from some of the things you spoke about the transparent glass and things, and about slippy surfaces, that there perhaps isn't that consultation. And I think it's very interesting in the fact that you talk about kind of beautifying projects. And I think we all know on this call that inclusive design can be a really beautiful thing. And I think any design that enables people to be able to live the life they want to live is a beautiful thing. And I think we just need to teach that to our designers. So thank you very much, Gosa. And with that, I'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you. So, Paris, I think that sets very good context from your experience and where you come from, in the background of how we start to, you know, get those insights into our designs, and also how we get our architects and our built environment professionals also working on this, and how we all work on it together. So the question I'm posing to you is, you've led the development of the RIB, the Royal Institute of British Architects, Inclusive Design Overlay, and you're an active member of multiple accessibility panels, and now you lead the access and inclusive design within the social impact team at McDonald. With this breadth of experience across strategy, advocacy, and practice, how do we ensure all inclusive environment professionals truly take note? And I would also say governments and other entities, and embed inclusion as a core, non-negotiable part of every project they work on.
Thanks, Anna May. Hi, everyone. Conscious of time, I'm going to try and keep this really short. I'd say firstly, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I think the first thing for me is, and you've mentioned it already, is thinking about inclusive design from the very start of a project. I would say with everyone. So if you can get all the project team members into a conversation around what inclusive design means, why it matters, what you're trying to achieve from the earliest phase of the project, that's really powerful. And I'm talking about not just the people designing, but as you say, planners, asset managers, who's managing and maintaining these environments, the service designers as well, and sort of project managers, etc. So getting as many people as possible in the room thinking about that. There's something around a strategy and really outlining your vision and goals for achieving an accessible and inclusive environment. and outlining what principles you sort of want to apply to the project as well. Importantly, especially with regards to that non-negotiable sort of fostering accountability, there's something about making sure, especially if you're the client side, that you are looking at how you can measure impact and measure and monitor sort of delivery teams as to kind of upholding those principles and doing activities that will essentially help with achieving those objectives and goals. And actually, importantly, the client should be putting aside sufficient budget to do the activities required to really make sure that that project is successful and inclusive as possible. I think importantly, when you're trying to create sustainable change in inclusive design, it's really powerful when you can take those objectives and sort of weave them into the wider program objectives or design project objectives. So sustainability, social value, all those other areas, governance, etc. If you can link those together, it becomes part of a golden thread and not an add-on, which is very powerful. I think getting everyone to sign up to the project objectives, the goals, the inclusive design strategy, and delivering training on the why. Why does it matter? I think statistics like what you shared, Anime, at the beginning of this webinar, they're so impactful. They're so impactful. And I think when you're having a conversation with people about why this matters, it's so important to go beyond that sort of legal conversation that can make everyone just slightly sort of on edge as to whether they're going to do the right or wrong thing. And I think we know that when it comes to accessibility and inclusion, it's not necessarily about striving to say the right thing or do the right thing all the all the time. It's about trying. It's about trying together. It's about understanding the why, putting the empathy at the heart of the project. And that matters. And I think in line with talking about empathy, for me, especially as someone, I'm neurodivergent, and I believe, so much in making sure that people with different accessibility requirements are engaged on a project. And, Gosa has spoken about that so well earlier. Lived experience and engaging and consulting people with different accessibility requirements is very important, but I would challenge everyone to think about going beyond what they think disability actually means and really looking at educating themselves on what pan disability is, the different disabilities that exist, and the fact that a mobility aid user, that is not necessarily the definition of their lived experience of that disability. A mobility aid user, a wheelchair user, might actually have cerebral palsy, and that is specifically what they experience in terms of disability. The mobility aid supports them with navigating through the built environment. So being really clear and understanding the different accessibility requirements, getting a diverse range of disability, neurodiversity, and then thinking beyond disability and thinking about different ages, people would, of different sizes and heights and shapes, different faith groups, etc. If we're really pushing for that accessibility and inclusion, and you want to meet with those people regularly, you want to engage with them regularly. And I personally love being on accessibility panels because we get a chance to sort of regularly consult and test ideas with the design teams that are shaping an experience and an environment, and they can support with holding everyone to account. And I would end really quickly with appointing an accessibility inclusion sort of specialist or inclusive design sort of specialist on your projects, and really making sure that you are getting as much knowledge as possible from people that are very knowledgeable in that area, not feeling like you have to do it on your own. And I think when it comes to that guidance that you mentioned earlier, the REBA inclusive design overlay, that's really what it tackles. It essentially outlines what a client should do, design team, project management, construction and asset management teams across the project lifecycle, and how everyone works together in sort of carrying this mantle for designing an accessible and inclusive environment, and not feeling this sort of burden in isolation to do it by themselves, whilst recognizing we all have to work together to do it. You can't do it by yourself, even with the inclusive design specialist supporting. So yeah, I'd love to talk about a lot more, but I'm really conscious of time.
Thank you. And thank you for your very, very concise and great answer. I'd love to touch on many of those areas, but I'm going to quickly go on to Maisa. I think the areas you spoke about, the golden thread and, you know, challenging what disability is and that intersectionality is really key to this. So Maisa, as somebody who has a very broad amount of experience and who is working on a project that's really a flagship of urban development and a really good example, the question I pose to you is, Expo City Dubai is a flagship urban development. What are some of the key lessons learned in implementing inclusive infrastructure at this scale, and how do you monitor consistency and continued inclusion across many sectors and areas of development?
Thank you so much for your question. Let me just take you one step back before Expo City Dubai. We are building on the legacy of Expo 2020. So we hosted Expo 2020, and it was one of the most accessible events, and accessibility was considered from the beginning at Expo 2020. So it's set for us the benchmark to start and continue the improving for accessibility and inclusion. So when we think now with the transformation for the city, not an event, to have a full city, full operation, residential, people come to work, play, enjoy leisure time, we consider accessibility from the planning, building, and also how we operate. So if I can summarize 5 key lessons from our experience hosting Expo 2020, COP28, and now our master plan. We know that we did an amazing job during Expo 2020, but this is not enough because accessibility is not a destination, it's a journey. So you need to keep improving, monitor, evaluating, and adding, and get the feedback from your audience and people coming to you. It's very, very important, and this is something we really learned from Expo 2020, and now we are implementing in our master plan, is to consider accessibility from the beginning, even from the design phase, the planning phase, at all the stages of the project, we include accessibility, and we have team who's supporting the accessibility. Another also lesson learned also from previous projects now for our new project, it's a plan for the operation from day one. So now with our huge master plan, if we want to add accessibility services, or for example, like changing places, quiet rooms, and sensory, we meet also with a community management team that will be handling these facilities and plan for them, because it's not only about creating something in the infrastructure and building accessible services without thinking and planning with the operation team and thinking about the operation, because we want something to have continuity. We don't want just to hand over the building once it's finished and then that's it. We didn't consider the operation and the need of the team that will be running the city itself. Also something very important, and this is something we do it on a regular basis, is to involve people with disability, or as we call them here in the UAE, people of determination. We invite them to come. We ask them what is their feedback, what things works for them at Expo, and what things we can improve it, or it didn't work, or if they travel outside and they find something very useful, how we can implement it at Expo City Dubai. We also learned that don't just consider the standard or requirement or even the legal requirement at the current now, because we are developing something for 5 years or 10 years. Whatever now is valid now is not valid for next year or even after 5 years. So what we are trying to do, and we learned that, for example, here in the UAE, we have Dubai Universal Code, Dubai Code. This is our standard, but we build on best practices, feedback experience, and we treat it as a must and a standard. If you ask how we can monitor what we are doing and keep this one, it's we keep accessibility everyone's business. It's not only the accessibility team. Like when we review the way of finding strategy in the master plan or urban planning, we said like, where's the accessibility? And we need the team involved that accessibility is there. About the mobility, the same thing. We try also to get diverse data. So we get like quantitative, qualitative from different teams to keep monitor. However, we set a very clear KPI and monitoring strategy and dashboard to keep tracking and updating and see where we are behind and how we can improve it with the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Maisa, and thank you for fitting in so much information in a very, very concise answer. I think it was very interesting to hear about not only your current work, but also the legacy and the legacy it builds on. As us at GDI Hub, we also come from the legacy of the London Olympic Park. And I think it's very important to, what you've said, is to learn from our past and what we can learn from good examples, what we can learn from bad examples, and what we can also learn from feedback loops from real users and real people with disabilities. And I thought it was also very interesting you mentioned this kind of phantom public, you know, this future user of a device or a service or a space, and that we don't always know what the future holds and what the future holds for different people. That was great. As we've had such a fantastic panel with such fantastic answers, I think we're running low on time. So I think I'm going to skip forward to our Q&A session and see if anybody has any questions. And let me just check. If anybody has any questions, please add them to our Q&A box now. Might just check with somebody on my team if we have had any questions into the Q&A, because I'm not sure if I'm just missing them or if we have a very quiet audience. Perhaps our speakers have been speaking in such depth and well-described things that people... Oh, hold on, I think we do have some questions. So we have one, the questions are coming in quickly. So our first question is, how can one use technology to combat the problems of accessibility? I don't know who would like to take that question. Maisa, perhaps I know you have some kind of interdisciplinary experience. Perhaps you'd like to take that question, but I'm open to any of our panelists chipping in.
I'm happy just to share quickly what we do here at ICLU. So part of the inclusive cities and urban development is the smart cities. So at very, very early stages, also, we don't just review the infrastructure and design. We try also to review any solution that they are proposing for the smart cities, the app, anything to ensure that it's compliance with the codes and compliance that give access to everyone. But definitely, again, technology sometimes it depends on the problem that it's a present or providing the challenge for the user. But definitely at some points, the technology can help and support and eliminate the barriers. But we prefer just to have immediate access without adding extra layers to give access.
Great. Would anybody else like to join in? Not, I will go on to our next question.
Yeah, and I made sure, just a quick one. I mean, on my side, one of the things we've mulled over at the architectural association is actually collecting data based on the experiences of the users of the various spaces. And of course, with technology, we are thinking of how you could mount certain data collecting tools and be able to look at, for example, the regular paths that the user is using and the kind of hurdles they're coming through, and that should be able to
we may have lost George, but that is also something at the Global Disability Innovation Hub that we're hoping to try and, as we've been speaking about, our inclusive infrastructure project is something we've worked on for the last 4 years, but it's something that we will continue for the next 3. And technology and AI and the integration of all these things alongside the challenges of the ethics around things like AI, but in technology and assistive technology is something that we really triumph as part of our innovation team at the Global Disability Innovation Hub. So we too are trying to look at how we can start to use these as tools. So I might move on to our next question. So there's actually 2 questions here that I think pair quite well together. So one is it possible to hear of examples of implementation in these cities that were good, which is a question that I was going to task to the whole panel also. And also, what are your thoughts on sharing bad accessibility practices for people to learn and improve on? Paris, you look like you're...
I'm in thought, you can see. I think the question from Manpreet on sort of sharing bad practice is a really good question. And I think, I guess it's how we do that. So for me, the best way personally is to have a lessons learned workshop. I think it's really good practice to always go back do a retro, reflect on what you did, and use that to identify what went well, what didn't work so well, what do you need to improve on. And I think as you sort of do that as regular practice, sorry, someone just popped into the meeting room I'm in. You could start to distill some of that. Now, obviously, some projects you won't really see the sort of impact of maybe negative impact until much later. So then again, it's important to have that lessons learned sort of session, you know, a good year or so later. But that's how I think it should be done. And I think that should be extracted. And I think it should be shared in a way that's really sensitive, but in a way that gives other people an opportunity to learn from those, you know, maybe wrong decisions, I'll say. Even if it is kind of with the best intent, as long as people, you know, it's not done in a sort of bad way. I think there's a way to really reflect on those decisions and learn from them together.
Absolutely. Would any of the rest of our panelists like to come in on that one?
May I go?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Anami. I have been saying that the questions that are, you know, are very interesting, and sometimes it makes you to speak, because when questions are raised, you remind something that you pass through. So I have been looking at my exemplary shared ones. So in Addis, I could say that previously we had no, you know, public toilets in a kind of organized manner, and now with corridor development plan, the government initiative, now you may find all the way the toilets, though those what I mentioned there, the gaps and, you know, technical aspects are missing, but you find toilets, because person with disabilities, if they miss toilet, they cannot go anywhere, because those are the basic things, even to learn, to have business, to make a kind of, you know, work premises kind of, you know, convenient, and so many things. We cannot go out even from our home if we don't have access to toilets. So when I say this, you may just, you know, assume that there are different kind of, you know, disability types, so including wheelchair users and different. So unless we have toilet service, it's impossible to access any kind of what's going on out there. So the city now in Addis is being developed in terms of infrastructure. So this could be maybe an opportunity and a good example when those inputs are considered and the standards are already being, you know, manipulated or in place. And the bad example that I could have, you may find in Addis several kind of ramps wherever you go, if you get a chance to visit Addis, but those ramps, not for people with disability, but even for those who constructed it could not climb it. You know, for anything that could not be served, but you will find everywhere there is ramp, because there is a question within the legislation. The ramp and the accessibility should be ensured, but that's not, as I said, specific in number, specific in the standard. So they build it, but they do not even they could not climb it, even not for people with disability. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was a really great answer, and good to think about how even sometimes that with accessibility standards and trying to bring ramps and things in, we really need to think about where we're putting them and how we're putting them. And I think that then again comes back to the whole thing of localization and localization of standards. So as we're coming up to the final minute, I think I will just go to our last slide, please, if my team can get me there. So this has been such an excellent webinar. We've definitely gone much over time in our discussion sections than we thought we might. We thought we'd have some more time for questions. So I hope I can keep the dialogue going with all the speakers on this call, and perhaps have you speak or speak with you at different times, either on or off calls. And I'd just like to highlight our next webinar. So anybody who's interested in hearing more and hearing about how inclusive infrastructure is not just about the built environment or the physical built environment, but it's also about the services and the service provision. It's about the connectivity of services. It's about how people provide those. It's about the people who are providing them and how they're trained. There's so much more I could talk about this, but please just join our next webinar to hear more, which will be on June 25th at the same time, 10 a.m. UK time, I'll say, rather than GMT, because I think it causes some confusion with our hour that we have sprung forward recently. And it'll be another hour webinar. And then this will be followed by another webinar, which is in July. It's also the last Wednesday of July, which is on climate resilience and innovation for inclusive cities. And the QR code there will lead you to the page where you can register for these webinars. So I thank you all my speakers. They were fantastic. The GDI Hub is really glad to have had such a great panel who spoke fantastically. And I really look forward to talking to you all again. And thank you everybody for joining this webinar. And I hope to see you all in the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.